Okay, so today is going to be something a little bit different. So long story short, I was trying to compile a list of Japanese PS1 games that had fan translations. If you've ever seen my series on Japan-only PlayStation games, you'll know I'm down for playing pretty much anything and everything, unless the game is filled wall to wall with text. Which unfortunately for non-Japanese readers like myself is a very regular occurrence. And weirdly enough, it never actually occurred to me to check out which games had fan translations. I've stumbled across a few by pure luck, but there are likely a ton of games that I've left out of my series that are in fact completely playable to a Western audience, and it's all down to me just not doing my research. So I figured it's about time I rectified that. Now, while my initial intention was just to make a little spreadsheet for my own personal use so I could track current and upcoming translations, it actually dawned on me that I don't think anybody has ever made a video just highlighting the translations that are out there. Sure, there's plenty of videos covering the individual translations, but a video covering all the translations, that might be handy. Well, it would have saved me a bit of time anyway, but sure, look, if nobody's making the videos you want to see, you might as well just make it yourself. So yeah, here's a video covering 48 fan-translated PlayStation games. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. Alright, so before we dig in, let's just do a little housekeeping and get you all up to speed. Firstly, all games featured today will be English language translations. There are many translations covering a wide variety of different languages, so if you ever wondered if there was a Polish, Spanish, Italian, or whatever patch for some of your favorite games, yes, there are tons. But for today anyway, all translations shown will be in English only. Secondly, while the majority of the games shown today will be complete and finished translations, we're also going to take the time to highlight some abandoned translations, as well as some upcoming in-progress translations, and even a retranslation or two, because why not? Thirdly, it's important to highlight that these fan translations are available for free online from various websites. For example, romhacking.net is a great source and also a very reputable site to source fan translations. But please be aware that you still need to provide your own copy of the game to apply the patch itself. So for legal purposes, I won't be discussing how to actually play translated games using emulators or real hardware. But trust me, a few seconds on Google and I'm sure you'll be able to piece it all together no problem. And lastly, while I do generally like to do full reviews of the games that I cover, if I did it this time around, the video would probably be around 10 hours long, and also maybe kill me. So instead, we're just going to be taking a quick look at each game instead. The purpose of this video isn't to review these games, nor is it to review the quality of the translations. It's pretty much just to make people aware of the breadth of translations out there for the PS1, and hopefully maybe even help you discover a few new games worth trying. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into it. We've got 48 games to get through, and to make things a little easier, we're just going to cover them one by one in alphabetical order, beginning with... Okay, according to all my word processors, a period comes ahead of the letter A in the alphabet, so there you go. Iru, which according to the patch title screen translates to They're Here, is a 1998 first-person survival horror game. This game was developed by Soft Machine, who also made another game I covered previously on the channel called Lucifer Ring. Safe to say, Iru is a very different experience from cutting up dragons with a big sword. The plot of Iru sees you take the role of a school kid that's been locked inside his school alongside some of the faculty and students. And of course, everything seems grand until one by one, people start getting killed. It plays very similarly to other first-person adventure games on the console, requiring a lot of exploring and puzzle solving. But the school setting and ongoing mystery surrounding the killer make for an interesting experience. It's also worth noting that this is one of the more recent patches to come out, having only just been released on the 14th of July, 2021. So yeah, it's probably a good thing that I decided to check midway through writing this thing. Some of you might be wondering what this game is doing on here, because Ace Combat 3 released in the West. Well, Ace Combat 3 is kind of a sore spot for a lot of fans of the series, because it's one of the rare times in the PS1 era that Namco actually shafted the Western audience. Our version of Ace Combat 3 is essentially a 36 mission linear campaign from start to finish with no cutscenes, that came on a single disc. But in Japan, Ace Combat 3 was a 2-disc release with fully voiced and animated cutscenes, extra character dialogue, and a total of 56 missions with branching paths that could lead to multiple different endings. It's really weird to see Namco release a gimped version of the game like this over here. Supposedly this was due to low sales of the game in Japan, which resulted in the budget being cut for the Western release, but could you imagine something like this happening nowadays? The internet would never forgive Namco. But anyway, at least thanks to this fan translation, you can finally experience one of Namco's finest PS1 games the way that it was truly meant to be played, with anime news broadcasts. Here we have another patch that only just came out, although this one is currently an in-progress beta version of the patch, so it's playable, but as of right now, not fully translated. I believe this game is a remake of a 16-bit game that did come out in the West called Aerobiz. It's my first time ever hearing about the series, but the concept actually seems pretty fun. It's a simulation game where you take the role of an airline CEO, and it's up to you to branch out your airline and make as much profit as possible by securing different routes, newer model planes, and even setting up hotels in different countries. The game operates in a turn-based format where you compete against 3 other CEOs for air supremacy. But what's fun is that the additional CEOs can actually be controlled by human players. So maybe we might potentially have a new hit multiplayer party game in our hands here? Move over Mario Party, we're setting up a hotel empire in Beijing instead. Plus the 3D models of the planes are pretty cool, so if you're a fan of consumer airlines and capitalism, this patch is one to keep an eye on. Alright, this one's pretty cool. In Animetic's story game Cardcaptor Sakura, you're basically playing through the entire first series of the anime. Although instead of being in the usual visual novel format, you play the game episode by episode in this really charming isometric 2D style, with voice dialogue, animated scenes from the show, and even fun minigames to represent the battles. Having watched the series myself growing up, this was a cool little trip down memory lane and a really unique way to bridge the gap between that gameplay and story experience. Plus the visuals and production value, they're just off the charts. Unfortunately, while this game seems to be the first in a line of planned Animetic story games, it doesn't look like any others were released after this one. There are countless animes I would love to see get a game in this style, but alas, it was not meant to be. But hey, if you're a Cardcaptors fan, at least this sole Animetic story game managed to get the translation treatment, so give it a try. Asuncia is our first JRPG to make the list, and it's a pretty odd one at that. This game features randomly generated maps and dungeons that allow for a different experience every time you play. You move around the map in an almost turn-based fashion, entering into battles and searching for new towns and dungeons. Although in a twist, the monsters on the field can also attack and destroy the towns, so there's a bit of a strategic element in here too, trying to balance exploration while also keeping an eye on what's happening around you. The battle system here also reminds me a little of Suikoden, and you can even unlock a variety of different characters to add to your party. It doesn't seem like the most story-centric RPG out there, but if you're looking to try something a little bit different from your standard PlayStation JRPG, this one might be worth a look. Hey, did you know the Bomberman series has a strategy RPG? Well, it does, and it's fully translated for your pleasure. It's like this weird mishmash of chess, grid-based tactical RPGs, and just straight up traditional Bomberman that actually ends up feeling as much like a puzzle game as it does a tactical RPG, but surprisingly, it all works really well. You essentially pick from a roster of different bomber pals, each with different classes and abilities, and go from map to map, aiming to take out your opponent's king before they take out yours, all while carefully pre-planning your moves and bomb placements so things don't go horribly wrong. Once again, this isn't a very serious or story-heavy RPG, but for a Bomberman take on the genre, I think Hudson Soft have created a pretty unique game in their own right, and it's well worth a try for fans of Bomberman and strategy games alike. Brave Proof is a game I didn't know much about before making this video, and that is a crying shame. What we have here is a beautiful 2D action RPG with visuals that really remind me of the wonderful story of Thor games on Sega platforms. The formula is what you'd come to expect from action RPGs of the era, with plenty of slashing and puzzle solving, but I noticed this one definitely seems to lean heavier towards the story and RPG elements. The combat also has an almost beat 'em up like quality to it as well, with you being able to combo and stun lock enemies. It's really cool. I've really only scratched the surface of this game, but going by the size of the maps and dungeons available, I think this one might offer up a nice challenge for those looking for a more hardcore action RPG experience on the PlayStation. Definitely worth a look. Brigadine Grand Edition is essentially an updated and expanded version of the original Brigadine, and while the original did see a release in North America, Grand Edition did not. But thanks to fan translations, this version is now available for all to experience. Now, I've never played a Brigadine game before, but holy hell, people love this game. They love it so much that there's even a fan dub available for the cutscenes.
So swear I, to unify this continent and end this terrible age of war. Knights of Norgard, will you now follow me to this future?
Yes, my lord! I, your loyal servant, Palamedes, would jump through fire and water to follow you wherever you may choose to go! I am your weapon!
How predictable.
What?
Unlike you, His Majesty is a very prudent man. Why on earth would he ever need to jump through any fire or water?
Why you?
The game itself is a tactical RPG where you choose from a variety of different rulers with the goal of battling the other rulers to take over the continent, with a unique story for each of the rulers, making for tons of replayability. Grand Edition essentially adds new units, characters, animations, music, cutscenes, and even multiplayer into the mix. Now, I'm not the guy to ask about whether Grand Edition is the definitive version of the game or not, but considering the work that went into this translation and the positive fan reaction, I'm gonna say it probably is. Plus it's got like wyverns and dragons and shit, so yeah, you know, it's cool in my books. Another game that you might not have expected to see show up on this list, but a retranslation does exist for Symphony of the Night. Now, I'm sure some of you may be aware that the Western PS1 release of Symphony of the Night has an interesting English translation and dub. I, for one, love the hokiness and delivery in this version of Symphony of the Night, but there is no denying it is far from an accurate representation of the original Japanese script. So this patch aims to give us the original experience as it was intended, alongside the Japanese voice dialogue, which definitely sounds a bit higher grade than the Western release. I think if you're a big fan of Symphony and we're looking for a reason to replay it, this would be a cool way to experience the game for returning fans. But if it's your first time, I still recommend sticking with the original. As dumb as it can be, I'd hate for you to miss out on Dracula's "What is a man" speech.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets! But enough talk! Have at you!
You see that? Now that's iconic. For fans of dungeon exploring, next up we have Chocobo's Mysterious Dungeon. Many of you are probably familiar with the Mystery Dungeon series, whether it's Pokemon or Chocobos. You've likely played at least one of these in your lifetime. And this game here represents both the first Chocobo entry in the series, as well as the series' first appearance on the PlayStation as a whole. And while this game's follow-up would see a release in North America, the original remains a Japan-only exclusive to this day. But as you may imagine since it's in this video, it is thankfully very much playable in English nowadays. Mystery dungeon games have always been a very love it or hate it kind of experience, I find. The combat and dungeon exploring blend this line between real-time and turn-based, and it's all about going as far as you can into a dungeon without blowing it all and dying out of nowhere. There's some really nice 2D visuals on offer, and also some less impressive 3D visuals. I don't think it's gonna convert any non-believers, but if you're a fan of this series, the PS1 original still holds up pretty well. Also, the music is really, really catchy. Oh, would you look at that? It's Choro Q2. This is one of the games I actually did a full review on in my Japan-only series. It's a car RPG from Takara that sees you racing cute toy cars to earn cash so you can drive your cute toy car around a town and go shopping for parts, so you can win more races to get even better parts. It's great. Now, while this isn't the best looking game, nor does it feature the best driving gameplay you'll ever see, the RPG elements really elevate the whole thing and make this one of the most enjoyable racing games that I've played in recent memory. It's also got a ton of content and one of the most upbeat soundtracks that I've ever heard on the console. I'll leave a link to my review in the description below if you want to learn more, but before you go trying out Choro Q2, you may want to wait because Hey, would you look at that, it's Choro Q3. Now this game I have not reviewed on my channel, but for all intents and purposes this is very much the same thing as Choro Q2, only even better apparently. Better tracks, better music, a bigger town to explore. Many fans of the series consider this game to be the apex. Well, at least as far as the original PS1 Takara trilogy goes. The creator of this translation is also responsible for the translation of Choro Q2, and they even recommend that you just skip that game and go straight to Choro Q3 if it's your first time, so who am I to disagree? So if the idea of a cute little CarPG with great music sounds appealing to you, well, make sure that you don't sleep on this one. So for those that don't know, the PlayStation and Sega Saturn got a unique version of the first Civilization game, but alas, it only ever came out in Japan. Of course, that never stopped anybody, so yes, we have a translation for it. Now this is another unfinished patch that only partially translates the game as of right now, and you also might be wondering why I've shown no footage with any English just yet. And that is because this is the only patch that I was unable to get working at all. Although that's probably not the patch's fault, we can just blame me for being too dumb to figure out what went wrong. Here are some pictures of it though, just to prove that it is in fact a real thing. Even without the patch, well, it's Civilization. If you played any of them, you can probably figure out the basic gist of everything. It works well, it looks nice, and I've got a soft spot for this version's CGI cutscenes. Truly some next gen stuff. Clock Tower First Fear is an enhanced port of the Japan-only Super Famicom original. This version adds some new scenarios, weapons, FMV scenes, some audio enhancements, and mouse support as well. The gameplay still remains the same as the original. We've got some point-and-click survival horror action where you roam a mansion and try your best not to get killed by the little scissor man. Aw, look at him go, he's terrifying. Not as terrifying as the parrot, mind you. If you don't mind the odd load time here and there, this patch might be the definitive way to play the original Clock Tower. Well, this or the WonderSwan version. Gotta love that monochrome goodness. Cotton Fantastic Night Dreams might be the very first translation released for the console, with its initial release dating all the way back to the year 2000. I feel like many of you are probably familiar with Cotton, the cute Japanese shooter starring a witch that's probably more famous for the prices that the series demands from collectors rather than the actual gameplay itself, but it is a testament to its quality that it still remains a ton of fun all these years later. The PS1 version is essentially a port of the arcade original from what I can tell and does a pretty admirable job overall, although I do hear some fans aren't too happy with the sound quality, especially considering that this is a CD release. The patch itself isn't really needed to enjoy the full game, but it does translate the cutscenes and a few other menu items to help you get that full experience. It's a really fun shooter and definitely a series worth checking out. Dr. Slump is another very recent release on the scene, with the fan translation from Hilltop releasing to the public in May of 2021. Dr. Slump was a game that always caught my eye due to how damn good it looked visually, so I'm delighted I finally got a chance to experience it properly thanks to this translation. For those unaware, Dr. Slump was the breakout manga from Akira Toriyama, who went on to make some stuff about dragons, I don't know. The game is about the comic misadventures of a little robot girl named Rail and her exploits with the various wacky characters that inhabit Penguin Town. The gameplay is kinda like a mix of adventure games, with lots of exploration and witty dialogue spliced in with the odd 3D platforming level as well. I tried to give myself a time limit when playing these games so the video wouldn't take too long to make, and I played this game way longer than I should have. It's so charming and funny, definitely worth a look if you're interested. Don't you just hate when a trilogy of games gets made and only the first and third game make it over to the West? Well, that was the case with Echo Knight, From Software's first-person, time-traveling, adventure, horror, spooky, puzzle game series. Thankfully, thanks to this patch, the trilogy is now fully playable in English, and this second entry in the series might be the spookiest of them all. Although I suppose having a name like the Lord of Nightmares might help get that point across. I believe this game runs on the same engine as Kingsfield 3, and the graphics are really quite impressive for the time. Gameplay wise, once again, it's what you'd come to expect from a first-person horror adventure game, but the time-skipping aspect in general From Software weirdness really helped give this series its own identity. Plus, instead of direct combat, you gotta defeat ghosts by using an age-old tradition. Turning on the lights? Haha, that'll teach her for haunting a house with electricity. So the thing with fan translations is that you never really know what you're gonna get. Sometimes you'll see patches for a game that people have been clamoring for years, other times you'll see translations for a game that pretty much nobody has ever heard of before. Well, say hello to Family Diamond, a very obscure 2002 release on the PlayStation that's just Chinese checkers. Now look, if you're into Chinese checkers, maybe this is the most amazing game that you've ever seen. Maybe you look at this gameplay and you think, damn, this is the pinnacle of entertainment software. Maybe you're also thinking, wow, this guy is really bad at Chinese checkers. And at least that last part, I'll agree with y'all. Anyway, this exists, so if you're looking to play a game of Chinese checkers on the PS1, I'm sure you could do worse. Maybe. Another game you might not have expected to see, or maybe you did, because I remember this patch getting quite a bit of press around the time of its release. You see, even though Final Fantasy VII got an official Western release, as is the case with a lot of PlayStation games, the official translation was far from perfect. Grammatical errors, misspellings, and a whole lot of dialogue just changed from the original Japanese script. And I guess one Final Fantasy fan looked at this translation and said, "Oh, I'm not having this. I'm not having this. No. So, after 5 years of hard work, we have the Final Fantasy VII retranslation, a version that aims to give you the full Final Fantasy VII experience as originally intended. Once again, this is another patch that I'd recommend trying if you're looking for a reason to revisit an old favourite. I noticed some fun differences even after just playing the opening bombing mission, and if I ever have a spare 40 hours knocking about down the line, I think I'd be very interested in giving this retranslation a full playthrough. Another one of the earliest fan translations to release on the PS1, and coming from the same team as the content translation, we have finger flashing. Please don't ask me what that means, I need to try stay monetized if possible. This is an interesting shooter puzzle game hybrid that revolves around you basically destroying enemies by playing rock, paper, scissors. You destroy the rock enemies with a paper shot, the paper with a scissors, and a scissors with a rock. Easy peasy. Well, no, not at all. This is actually a very hard game. Even if you get used to the weird button prompts and change the buttons to match the colors on screen, it is still relentlessly difficult and requires lightning quick reactions and precision. Expect to see this screen a lot, but hey, at least it has infinite continues, so it's not all bad. This is another game that you can very much enjoy without the translation, but at the very least it is helpful to have if you want to translate the menus and brief cutscenes into English, so there you go. Front Mission 2 is the first 3D entry in the much-loved strategy RPG series and the first to appear on the PlayStation. Front Mission 3 remains one of my all-time favourite PlayStation games, so getting a chance to check out this Japan-only release was a lot of fun. Now interestingly, even though this game is fully translated, they seemingly weren't able to fit the full translation onto the disc. So the game itself is partially translated, but it also comes with a full document that features an entire translation of the remaining script. It's something I wasn't aware of before researching this video, but one of the biggest issues that these teams come across during the hacking process is space limitations. Japanese characters generally take up much less space versus the English alphabet. That's why you'll oftentimes see Japanese versions of games favoured during speedruns, since the text just moves along a lot quicker. It can take a lot of effort to make these translations work within a CD's space limitations, and it seems like Squaresoft might have packed a little too much 3D flair into this single disc game that the translation's efforts suffered because of it. Now keep in mind, this game is still very much playable at the very least. You might have to keep a few A4 pages beside you if you want to keep up with what's going on, but you know what they say, beggars can't be choosers. And if it means I can play Front Mission 2, well, then I'm more than happy. Can you believe that this is my first time playing a Goemon game? One of Konami's most prolific series spanning a whole range of consoles before, like most Konami franchises, is now likely lying buried in a pachinko machine somewhere. Well hey look, at least after trying out Goemon's first PlayStation outing, I can see the appeal. The gameplay is a mixture of top-down RPG with some cool side-scrolling 2D sections that really take me back to some of the 16-bit era's best action games. While the gameplay here does seem very similar to some of the later 16-bit entries in the series, the extra bit of flair the PS1 adds to the graphics department makes for a really nice looking game, and the music as well. Oh my god, they popped off on this one. This game features music from both Akira Yamaoka and Michiru Yamane, who worked on other Konami classics like Silent Hill and Symphony of the Night, so if you're not going to play this game, at least give the soundtrack a look. Either way, my time with this game was good enough to make me want to check out other Goemon games in the future. I can't say if this is a good first Goemon game, but it won me over, so it'll probably win you over too. Here's one for all the Suikoden fans. Well, two actually. Suiko Gaiden Volume 1 and 2 are two visual novels that take place around the timeline of Suikoden 2. These are two separate releases, but since they're both so closely aligned, I figured it was probably better to look at them together. Being that the games are called Suiko Gaiden, this is unsurprisingly a side story that intersects with the main plotline of Suikoden 2. Can the games be enjoyed without playing Suikoden 2? I'd say so. The writing and character development is on point from the very beginning, but really these games are meant to be played and enjoyed as a side story to Suikoden 2 that adds additional depth and context to the world and its characters. And from what fans say, they really do add so much to the overall experience and offer a nice lead into the story of Suikoden 3 as well. Probably won't appeal to anybody outside of Suikoden fans, but if you're looking for an excuse to play through Suikoden 2 again and have yet to try these, then they are a must. Did you know there was a Battle Angel Alita game? Well, there is, just the one, and it's on the PlayStation receiving a fan translation. This one is only about 50% finished as of the time of writing, but it is shaping up to be very promising. The game is an action RPG and actually follows the plot of the manga pretty closely. I believe the creator of the manga, Yukito Koshiro, was heavily involved in the creation of the game as well, so this is about as faithful an adaptation as you can get. The game sees you taking the role of the android Gali, known as Alita in the English adaptations. It's up to you to try figure out your origins as well as becoming the best hunter warrior in the whole scrapyard. This involves a mixture of exploration and also beating the heck out of criminals for cash. The graphics and sound aren't the best you'll ever see, but I think the story and gameplay really shine through from what I've played. The combat is actually very similar to beat 'em ups with lots of different combos and moves. It's really, really fun. The developers of this game, EA...
It's in the game.
No, not that EA. Also developed a game I looked at on this channel previously called Blade Arts, and the combat system is very, very similar across both games, focusing heavily on directional inputs and target locking. Blade Arts is definitely another prime candidate for a future fan translation, but for now at least, this patch and game are definitely one worth keeping an eye on as it progresses. Okay, this is a very interesting game. Put your hands up if you ever wanted to play a vampire dating sim crossed with a JRPG. Alright, those of you who put your hands up are now on a list somewhere, but I gotta say, Imadoki no Vampire is pretty damn funny. You can tell almost immediately that this game is kind of tongue-in-cheek in its delivery, whether it's the incredibly extra opening movie, your overly enthusiastic vampire butler, or the fact that your main love rival arrives in school on a jet. Well, you know you're in for a wild ride. The main core of the game is to basically win the heart of one of the many potential girls to become your vampire wife. The game is pretty open-ended and also features dungeons and RPG battles for some reason. The whole thing is pretty crazy to be honest, and even though this isn't my type of game, the writing is really funny, the animated scenes look really nice, and there's enough gameplay variety here to make it worth a try for those on the fence. But hey look, if you're into sexy anime vampire boys, then I'm sure you're already downloading this one as we speak. IS Interno section. One of my favourite Japan-only PS1 games. This is another game I've covered on the channel before, and this game is really, really fucking good. What we have here is a trippy tunnel shooter from Squaresoft with varied action, amazing music, and some of the best visuals you will see on the PS1, running at a rock-solid 60 frames per second using the PlayStation's high-resolution mode. Truly something special. Now look, this is another game that can be very easily enjoyed without the fan translation, but what the translation does do is update some of the photo sensitivity warnings as well as a few of the menu options into English, so it does come in handy, especially if you're trying to navigate through saving your high scores. Once again, I'll leave a link in the description to my review if you'd like to learn more about this excellent game, but trust me, this game comes highly recommended as a must play on the system, and you should go out of your way to try it. You won't regret it. Up next we have Kakuge-Yaro, fighting game creator, which is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. A fighting game that allows you to edit and create your own characters and fighting styles. Now while it may not be the most in-depth fighting game creator I've ever seen, I think what really sets this one apart is just how easy it is to use, allowing you to edit a character's visuals and moves to your liking in pretty much no time at all. Even if you're not into the creation aspect of this game, it also features your standard arcade and versus modes with a surprisingly decent techno and drum and bass soundtrack as well. Of course, being that it's a customizable fighting game, the combat system and visuals aren't the most polished in the world, but I think you may be surprised at how good this game actually is in spite of that. Certainly much better than I was expecting anyway. If you fancy yourself a fighting game master and want to try design your perfect character, well, this is a great option to flex your creativity. King of Crusher is a game that has made some waves for itself recently. What was originally a very weird and obscure Japanese release has become somewhat of a YouTube darling, purely down to the fact that it's a game about fucking shit up. Basically, you play as your average Japanese male minding your own business before you get bit by what I can only describe as a very evil bug. This results in you being overcome by rage and essentially spurred on by the evil bug to give in to your anger and destroy everything around you, which of course we're happy to oblige in. Things start out simple with you wrecking your home and your workplace before you begin to mutate and start taking out bigger and bigger locations. Think of it as some sort of backwards angry Katamari and you get the idea. It's a very strange, very janky, but unique game that could only come from Japan, and I'm glad that this translation exists. Once again, you can enjoy it without it, but you'd be missing out on the evil stuff the bug tells you, which, you know, it's important for character development, and scaring your family out of the house, I don't know. Alright, now we're talking. One of the most influential games to ever come out on the console, the original Kingsfield was the first RPG to ever release on the PlayStation, and also set the groundwork for first-person control in a 3D console RPG. Also, to make things confusing, this isn't the same game as the Kingsfield that came out in the West. That game was actually Kingsfield 2, and this here is the real Kingsfield, a Japan-only exclusive that came out just under 2 weeks after the PlayStation's original launch. Although oddly enough, Kingsfield 2 would also be the first RPG to be released in the West on the PlayStation. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this isn't very old and very janky, but being that this is my first time playing a Kingsfield game and that this game came out in 1994, I'm surprised by how well it still plays. Like, obviously this is a difficult game with quite a steep learning curve, but once you get its various nuances down, this one I found hard to put down. Also, this is the game that features the iconic mind-boggling skeletons from those early PS1 magazine reports. Look, here he is in the flesh. Well, maybe not the flesh, bone. Either way, as I'm sure you all know, this series was the inspiration for the insanely popular Souls series of games. So if you want to go back and experience the roots of From Software's series, well, with this fan translation, now you can. Following up the original Kingsfield, we have what might be the most interesting translation on the whole list. Now see, Kingsfield 3 did see a Western release, once again confusingly misnumbered as Kingsfield 2 over here. But Kingsfield 3 Pilot Style is actually a unique standalone demo of Kingsfield 3 that was given out as a promotional disc by From Software staff, and rumours say that only 8 copies of this disc are out in the wild. Now, I can't confirm if that's true or not, but this does make this one of the most obscure PlayStation releases ever. So the fact that we have it here and fully translated makes this quite the treat. Now, as I mentioned, this is pretty much a demo of Kingsfield 3, but what makes it special is that it's an hour-long standalone experience separate from the main game. As a way to experience a bite-sized version of the full Kingsfield experience, it's a really fun time. Kingsfield 3 naturally saw a lot of enhancements over the original game, from the graphics to the combat and the UI. Even the skeletons got a bit of an update. You can really start to see where the Souls games get their influence when the enemies start trying to kill you with their ribs. Honestly, if you were ever looking to try out the Kingsfield series for the first time, I think Pilot Style might actually be the best way to do it. It's a great snapshot of the Kingsfield experience and can be beaten in just one sitting, so you're only giving up around an hour at most. What's the harm? Here we have another interesting example of a fan translation. So the Neverhood originally released in the West on home computers. It was this gorgeous claymation adventure title, full of humor and simple but interesting puzzle design. Now, while this game did see a PlayStation exclusive follow-up called Skull Monkeys, which was a platforming game, a really weird platforming game, The original Neverhood unfortunately never saw a port beyond the PC original, unless you live in Japan, where it actually did see a port on the PS1. It was a pretty common occurrence to see Western-made PC titles receive PS1 ports in Japan, but not in the West. I don't know why this is, but it at least certainly makes it an easier job if you wanted to translate the PS1 versions, because you have a whole Western PC release to reference. So yeah, here we are, the Neverhood in English on PS1. Oddly, this translation seems to kind of just surface out of nowhere on the internet one day. I searched online but just couldn't find the original source or people behind it. The earliest mention of the translation that I could find was from a forum post in 2019, but that doesn't confirm the actual origins of the project either. So yeah, this translation's existence is kind of a mystery. Well, to me at least. As for the game itself, well, it's a decent port of the PC original. It's a slow-paced adventure game for the most part, and everything functions as you'd expect. Honestly, the game relies so much on visual cues for its gameplay and storytelling that you'd probably be fine playing this one without the translation anyway. But having the translation sure does make getting into the game and appreciating everything that much easier. Funnily enough, the PS1 version of the Neverhood was such a success in Japan that it actually spawned an additional Japan-only Neverhood game called Clayman Gun Hockey. It's kind of mad that this even exists, but if you ever wanted Neverhood Air Hockey, well, your prayers have finally been answered. Another one for the strategy fans out there, next we have Langrisser 4. This is a turn-based tactics game, not too unlike your Fire Emblems or your Famicom Wars. It actually blends the gameplay from both of those series a little bit, with you having solo elite units and additional army units that attach to bulk up your strength and numbers. This is again another story-heavy game with multiple choices that affect the outcome of the plot going forward. Thankfully, the game starts out strong and hooks you in almost immediately with some high stakes, and if the story doesn't win you over, well, the overly flashy special moves and battle scenes probably will. Now, while this is the 4th entry in the series and has some ties to some of the previous entries, I think you'll be fine starting with this one if you're a first timer. As a big Fire Emblem fan, this is very much my type of game, and it seems to have all the ingredients to make a very fun and addictive strategy title. Definitely one worth a look. LSD Dream Emulator is probably one of the most well-known Japanese exclusive PS1 releases, but when you have a game that's this trippy and weird, well, it's bound to attract a little attention. LSD is basically a walking simulator that allows you to experience a whole host of strange and surreal visuals, alongside some equally strange and surreal audio design. The game was apparently inspired by a dream journal from writer Hiroko Nishikawa that details the various dreams and nightmares they would experience while asleep, and this here is the resulting game based on that journal. The hell is going on in that person's head? This very much won't be a game for everybody. It's really more of an experience than a traditional game, and it's something that everybody will have a different reaction to, be it positive or negative. The English translation certainly ain't going to make things any easier to digest, but it does allow you to experience this strange dream world as intended, so it's highly recommended if you do decide to try it. Hey, remember Metabots? Well, they're back in PS1 form. In Japan, there were a bunch of portable Metabot RPGs, very much in the vein of Pokemon games, down to the visuals, and even the way the games were split into 2 different versions. Well, this Metabots game is supposedly a remake of the very first Metabots game on the Game Boy, now upgraded to shiny new PS1 graphics. Nice. What's cool about this game is that it actually follows the Pokemon formula so closely that it kind of feels like the closest thing you'll ever get to a Pokemon game on the PS1, which is kind of neat in itself. But of course, the real draw are the Metabots and the battles themselves. There's tons of collectible parts and customization options, and full 3D battles too, which look pretty great, I gotta say. It's never not satisfying destroying robots part by part. Plus, one of the Metabots is a dump truck, which is really funny. So if you're a Metabots fan or looking for a Pokemon style RPG experience on the PS1, this one should be well worth a look. Mazurna Falls is an adventure game from Human Entertainment that takes heavy inspiration from the much-loved Twin Peaks. You're caught in a mystery surrounding the disappearance of one of your classmates in the fictional town of Mazurna Falls in Colorado. This game is kinda revolutionary for its time as it offers up a huge open-world town to explore that is remarkably detailed. You can even talk to pedestrians on the streets. This game is quite the cult classic, and the patch itself is rather impressive too, requiring the creation of a special compression tool to fit the game's very large script onto a single disc in English. It's the result of a lot of hard work and really shows the effort and passion that's being put into making games like this accessible to a wider audience. Now I will say Mizzurna Falls is a fascinating but very difficult game, featuring a whole lot of adventure game trial and error that can easily cost you an entire run with one error. So do be aware of that before going in, but on the PlayStation it really is a one-of-a-kind experience that helped inspire similar games like Deadly Premonition, so for that alone I think it's worth trying out. Also, you can pet the dog in this game, so you know, 10 out of 10. Moon is another interesting story. This is one of the games I'd personally been waiting a long time to see a fan translation for. It's a very different style of RPG where instead of you playing the role of the hero, you're actually a kid transported into an RPG video game where you instead help the world grow through the power of love, while the actual hero of your game stomps around making everybody's lives miserable. That quick synopsis doesn't really do it justice, but it is absolutely one of the most unique RPGs ever made and was a big inspiration for indie darlings like Undertale, to name but a few. So when word got out a few years back that work on a fan translation of Moon was underway, naturally everybody was pretty hyped. This was always one of the most requested fan translations of any PS1 game, and the fact it was actually going to happen was pretty amazing. And then, something even more unlikely happened. Turns out the game was going to get an official release in English for the first time ever on the Nintendo Switch. I don't think anybody was expecting this to happen, not the team translating the game, not the fans, nobody really, but the fact it did is pretty crazy. The official version of Moon has since been released back in August of 2020, but unfortunately the announcement of this version of Moon kind of put a spanner in the works for the ongoing fan translation of the PlayStation original. Thanks to this news, progress on the PS1 fan translation pretty much ground to a halt. I get why fan translations on original hardware are a tremendous amount of effort, and since the goal is usually just to make sure people can enjoy these often locked away games, when the goal has already been kind of achieved by surprise, well, I imagine it can be tough to continue. Although, luckily this year, an anonymous source posted an unfinished 2019 beta build of the translation up on the internet. Now, since this is a beta build, you can expect a few extra bugs and some compatibility issues, but the game itself seems to be completely translated and fully playable with this patch. It's also worth noting that the translation differs from the Switch localization too, as the work here was completed prior to that game releasing. It's not perfect, but it's Moon in English on the PS1, and it's really nice to see that the time and effort put in by the original translation team at least hasn't gone to waste. Plus, the NPCs in this game sound really weird.
Whatever. Satisfy you? Thank you. Still your most nine. Still your most nine.
Yeah, you should try this. German exclusive chicken shooting game More Hun 2 has an English translation for some reason. I'm not going to say many people were exactly clamoring for this one, but as I always say, beggars can't be choosers. And look, the more translations we have, the better. Plus, the game came from the guy responsible for the Kingsfield and Brigadine patches, so frankly, he can do whatever the hell he likes. He's earned it. Now, for something a little bit different, we have Neketsu Oyaku from Technosoft. This was a launch title for the system over in Japan, and is as such the first side-scrolling beat-em-up ever released on the console. Now, while this is a pretty fun beat-em-up, it does really feel like a 16-bit era game from a gameplay perspective. And I don't mean in terms of combat and abilities, more so the movement and speed of your characters. This game doesn't really feel like it utilizes the power of the PlayStation in any meaningful way. It's more like you're playing a souped up Super Nintendo game. Although, like I said, this is still a pretty fun beat 'em up if you're looking for something more akin to the classics like Final Fight or Streets of Rage. Although for me, the real selling point is just how weird this game is willing to be. It has no problem making you fight a boxing glove clad octopus while in a whale's stomach. Also, since it is a Technosoft game, the music is pretty amazing too. This is another game that you can very much enjoy without the English patch, but it translates some of the background graphics, menu details and character bios, so as always, it's a great option if you want the full experience. Finally, a chance to talk about a Shin Megami Tensei game on the channel. What a time to be alive. For those unaware, Persona 2 was split into 2 separate games, each offering a unique perspective on the same narrative. The first game to be released was Persona 2 Innocent Sin. Now, in spite of the plan being to release this game outside of Japan, for some reason it just never happened. It was probably because Hitler was a boss battle in the game. Okay, it was definitely because Hitler was a boss battle in the game. Of course, the second game, Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, did see a release in the West, as it was notably absent of any Nazi imagery. Now, as you'd imagine, receiving only half of the full Persona 2 experience, and the latter half at that, definitely created quite the demand for a translation of the original, and eventually, many years later, that we did receive. Persona 2 is really where the series begins to hone its trademark traits, and as an RPG, it really does hold up quite well by modern standards. Many fans of the Persona series would consider Innocent Sin in particular one of the best entries in the whole franchise, so if you're a Persona fan, trying this is a no-brainer. Of course, similarly to Moon, Persona 2 Innocent Sin did eventually get an official translation and Western release through the PSP remake, although this was a few years after the original PS1 fan translation. Also, in an ironic turn of events, the PSP remake of Persona 2 Eternal Punishment to this day remains a Japan-only exclusive, with fans hoping to see a fan translation of this version someday. Oh, how the turns table. Another one of the most in-demand fan translations was for Hideo Kojima's Policenauts. This game is the next evolution from Kojima's beloved classic Snatcher, returning to the same adventure-style gameplay crossed with the odd shooting segment. This game features all the Kojima traits that you'd come to expect. References to popular movies and TV shows out the wazoo, cinematic flair, amazing music, an incredible attention to detail, and a story that can hook you in from the very start. This PlayStation version is actually an enhanced port of the PC-98 original and features new animated cutscenes that unfortunately run a little worse than the 3DO and Saturn ports of this game, but for the most part, this is still an excellent version of one of Kojima's best games, and it's an absolute shame that will likely never see a modern release of both this and Snatcher, as they are some of the finest adventure game experiences you can get on a home console. Plus, it's even got the BBC. Well, it's got a BBC. If we're going to talk about the hot new translations on the scene, I think the big one right now is the upcoming Racing Lagoon fan translation from Hilltop, the same team responsible for the excellent Dr. Slump patch. Racing Lagoon is another car PG, but this time it's from the master of the PS1 RPG. Imagine, if you will, a Squaresoft tuning car RPG set in Japan on the PS1. Does that not sound like the game of your dreams? Well, for me it is anyway. Ever since discovering this game for the first time many years ago, it's been on the top of my wishlist for a fan translation, and then Hilltop, they're only going and bloody doing it. What I'm playing here today is the recently released sneak peek of the translation. It offers you a taste of the experience by letting you play through the game's prologue, which is roughly 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay. And you know what? That's all it takes to get what this whole game is about, from the story to the racing to the incredible vibe just running throughout the whole thing. This is a game that just oozes cool, and I think for many, that is as much a selling point as the gameplay and story itself. This demo is just a quick taster, but really it only made me want the full thing more. So expect this patch to be making waves when the full version hopefully sees the finish line soon. So have you ever wanted to experience being a child CEO who is also responsible for saving the world from aliens using a giant remote-controlled robot? Well, I didn't think I did until I played this game. Remote-controlled Andy is, for lack of a better term, absolutely wild. In this game, you play as a young child that controls a giant robot using a remote that looks suspiciously like a PS1 controller. Well, the gimmick is that you're viewing things from the perspective of this child, so you have to maneuver the giant robot around different environments, while also making sure not to cause any damage, and also fight big enemies, while also needing to position yourself on foot to make sure you've got a good view of the robot in the process. And also, controlling the robot is really complicated and difficult, and I keep destroying everything, but you know what? That's what makes this game fun. The fact the robot has so many different inputs for each of its limbs, rotations, and like, pretty much everything it does, makes successfully mastering the controls incredibly satisfying, and the process of simply walking down the road is an engaging experience in itself. Also, the way the combat requires you to utilize the momentum of your robot with you needing to counterbalance and enhance the force behind your punches, it just feels so goddamn satisfying. You can really feel the weight behind everything you do, and it's just such a cool and unique take on the traditional big robot game. Throw in a bunch of humorous story segments, a company to manage, a whole host of additional robots to unlock, a 2-player mode, and also some of the cleanest graphics you'll see on the PS1. Well, you've got yourself quite the game here. Super Robot Wars Alpha Gaiden is one of the many Super Robot Wars games that first started out on the Game Boy. The majority of the games in this series are tactical RPGs that see characters and mecha from many popular Japanese series like Gundam and Macross crossing over into one big fanservice-y tree. The game itself is a side story of the Super Robot Wars Alpha series of games, and with this being the first one that I've ever played, I'm not exactly in the position to tell you if this is a great place to start, but what I will say is that the tactics gameplay itself is really quite a lot of fun. The game utilizes some fun gimmicks like the mechs being able to transform and even combine together, and also the battle animations are incredibly over the top and great to see in motion. Although I will say I felt a little out of the loop with the stories and characters, but that is probably down to me just not being very well versed on Japanese mecha lore. This is another game I wasn't expecting much out of, but found myself enjoying a lot more than I thought I would. I can't imagine this would appeal much to newcomers, but if you're a fan of the Super Robot Wars series, then this one might be worth checking out. Tales of Fantasia is a remake of the very first Tales game released originally on the Super Famicom back in December 1995. This version features redrawn sprites and backgrounds, enhanced audio, an updated battle system, an animated opening, and even fully 3D world maps. Quite the remake, I gotta say. I've played plenty of the newer 3D Tales of games, but this is my first time trying one of the classic 2D entries, and I gotta say, this stuff really holds up quite well. The visuals here are some of the nicest 2D I've seen on the console. The detail here is just incredible, and the chunky player sprites in the battle segments look excellent too. The story here definitely comes across a lot darker than what I'm used to from a Tales game, but I think that might be a nice change of pace from the overly anime stories and characters of the newer entries. Plus the combo heavy battle system remains a ton of fun as ever. So if you're ever interested in seeing where the Tales of series began, well, the fan translation of the PlayStation version of Fantasia is a great way to do it. Tearing Saga is basically a Fire Emblem clone on the PlayStation. Now, I might get a bit of flack for saying that, but this game is quite literally Fire Emblem on the PlayStation. The game came from Shozu Kaga, the creator of Fire Emblem, and was developed by his new dev studio called Tir na Nog. Tir na Nog, of course, being the Irish version of the Shadow Realm, except we all have a great time and everybody gets a bag of cans. So long story short, the creator of Fire Emblem basically decided to make Fire Emblem again, but on the PlayStation. The game was originally meant to be called Emblem Saga, and if you thought a name like that was a bit too on the nose, well, so did Nintendo, and they decided to actually sue Tir na Nog and the publisher Enterbrain over the game's release. They changed the name from Emblem Saga to Tear Ring Saga to help ease things, but Nintendo decided to go ahead and sue them anyway. This is actually an interesting case in Japan, as it was the first time any company had really sued another over their game copying theirs, and this resulted in a 3-year-long court case between Nintendo and Enterbrain that eventually resulted in the courts finding that it didn't impeach on Nintendo's copyright. So there you go, there's a fun little bit of Japanese gaming history, the results of which possibly setting a precedent that could alter Japanese game development forever. But it didn't, so here's Fire Emblem on the PlayStation. Tear Ring Saga, as you'd expect given the team behind it, is an excellent tactical RPG in its own right, but you can never really shake the feeling that you're playing some sort of long-lost Fire Emblem game, which is kinda weird. Although that being said, I love Fire Emblem, so this is actually kinda rad. Now, for such a late release on the PlayStation, it's certainly not the most impressive 2D game out there. In fact, it oftentimes looks like an enhanced GBA game than a PS1 game, but regardless, the game looks nice and it plays really well. This is another game that I'd really love to play through sometime, but I hear the game takes around 80 hours to complete, which is a very, very long time. But hey, at least that's value for money. Needless to say, if you're a Fire Emblem fan and you've never heard of this game before, well, you'll probably want to give this one a look. The Mystic Dragoons is another partial fan translation. I wouldn't exactly consider the game fully playable in this state, but I thought I'd include it nonetheless. The gameplay is very much like any traditional JRPG, but this time we have a story heavily focused on dragons. I wish I could tell you more about it, but the translation only covers the opening of the game and stops from there. Now you may be wondering why I even bothered to include this at all. Well, all the menus, items and battle scenes are translated into English, so if you ever wanted to try a JRPG for battling alone, yeah, it's playable. Although I did get stuck numerous times wandering around near the beginning of the game because I didn't know what to do, so maybe it's not. The game does seem like it has an interesting plot and world though, and there's some really nice 2D visuals on offer. Although I will say I wasn't mad on the L battle system from what I played. It all felt kinda awkward and cumbersome. Maybe I just need some more time to get into it, but the first impression, it wasn't great. As far as I know, this patch was a beta version that has since been abandoned, so don't expect to see it completed anytime soon, but hey, at least it's a nice little look at what could have been. And finally, our last game in today's showcase is Tobal 2. I'm sure many of you out there are familiar with Tobal No. 1, the Square published fighting game developed by Dream Factory with the silky smooth 60 FPS gameplay and Akira Toriyama characters. It's pretty fun, you should try it. Well, the game got a follow-up on the PS1 that, unlike its predecessor, never seen a release outside of Japan. Now, generally speaking, fighting games aren't really good candidates for fan translations. Most of the time, fighting games are some of the most import-friendly games around. And Tobal 2 from the outset certainly fits that mold, with your traditional arcade and versus modes offering up that simple pick-up-and-play gameplay that fighters are known for. But one of the biggest selling points of the Tobal series is that it also includes an RPG quest mode. And this right here is why Tobal 2 has a fan translation. If you ever wanted to experience a fighting game RPG, well, Tobal 2 is the game for you. You want to fight a frog, a penguin, a mole, a grey ghoul? Well, finally, we have the technology. Even better, you can unlock all the fighters from this quest mode and use them in arcade mode if you like, giving this game an insane roster of potential characters. Of course, that's if you're good at the game, which I am very much not, but either way, this is a really cool fighting game that you can now experience in full thanks to the fan translation. Alright, there you are. That's the majority of fan translations currently available on the PS1. I'm sure I might have missed a few translations that are out there, and I have no doubt that this video will be out of date almost immediately, going by the rate that we're getting new translations nowadays, but I think this should at least give you some more insight into the range of games out there to try. I personally think we might be entering into somewhat of a golden age of PS1 translations, because in the past we'd be lucky to get maybe 1 or 2 of these a year, and at the moment we seem to be getting nearly 7 or 8 a year, with more just continuing to pop up out of nowhere all the time. I'd say if you're interested in learning more, it's worth following a lot of the teams that are working on these games. Plenty of them have Discords and Patreons if you want to support and help make sure these upcoming patches see completion. I think it's important to remember and appreciate the incredible amount of time and effort that goes into these things, and they're almost always done with the sole intention of making these games more accessible to everybody. So remember to support and be kind to the people behind them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at the many fan translations on the PS1. I hope to check out many of these games in depth down the line on my channel, so make sure to subscribe if you want to check out more in the future. For now, I suppose I'll leave you all with a question. If you could pick one PS1 game to get the translation treatment, which one would it be? For me, it would have been Racing Lagoon, but hey look, dreams can come true. So for now, my new pick would be London Serai Tanteidan, which is a 2D RPG set in Victorian steampunk London. I always thought the visuals in this game were stunning and would love to be able to play through it someday without having to resort to following a guide online. So if anybody out there would like to do that, I'd be very grateful. I'll sort you out with a bag of cans, any cans you like, Guinness, Orchard Thieves, Dutch Gold, you name it. Anyway, as always, I appreciate you sticking around to watch the video. I'll be back real soon with some more PS1 content. Until then though, I will be busy fighting this frog. Take care.